This amendment would allow some of the most vulnerable people in our society to fight for the benefits to which they are entitled. I commend it to the House and I beg to move.
Amendment proposed, page 125, line 5. At the end, insert the words as printed on the marshalled list.
My Lords, my name is also on this amendment, along with that of the Noble Lord Panic and the Noble Lord Bach, and I seek to intervene at this early stage, partly for that reason, and partly because I can, as it were, support many of the points that my noble friend has made without reiterating them. I do think we really do need to bear in mind that this proposed change in legal aid is not taking place in a vacuum. It is taking place at a time of great actual or potential turbulence, or at least change, in the benefit system, arising to some small extent in respect of housing in the Localism Act, to a much greater extent in the Welfare Reform Act, as it probably now is. Now, I wouldn't want anybody to think that I'm opposed to the Welfare Reform Act. I had some reservations about parts of it. Like every other group in the House, I support the basic thrust of it, but we ought to be absolutely clear that you can't have change on that scale in the social security system without a lot of gainers and a lot of losers, and a lot of people who will want to test, question and seek advice on the changes that affect them if they feel aggrieved. And there are a lot of these changes. There is the housing benefit cap. There is the benefit cap. That, I think, is probably less serious in this context in some ways, because the numbers affected are supposed to be fewer. There are huge numbers of disabled people and carers affected. Many, many tenants affected by what is called in the housing benefit area, the spare bedroom tax. And these are not trivial numbers. The estimate given to me by the DWP, by the Minister, of the numbers of people affected by the housing benefit cap, the bedroom tax, if I may use a tendentious phrase, is 670,000. The numbers of people potentially affected by the disability and carer and other changes in the Welfare Reform Act is of the same order, if I remember the figures given in committee are right. So we're talking about well over, potentially, 1 million people. I have to say that if I was still an MP, I would be a bit worried, because that is an average of around 2,000 per constituency. And they will all have relatives, some of whom will be affected, many others of whom will be upset by what is happening, or could happen, to their relatives. They won't all have a great grievance, but there will be enough of them who will have a grievance and who will be bewildered and in some cases frightened, as we know from the emails we all received over the Welfare Reform Act, who will not know where to turn, but will know they need advice and help from somewhere. So let us not underestimate the scale of this proposal, or the impact of this. My second point, in what I hope will not be too long a speech, excuse me, is, does it matter? There has been a bit of a flavour in Minister's comments that the only things that mattered in this area, enough to warrant a continuation of legal aid, were things that threatened life or liberty for example, orders under the Mental Health Act, or highly specialised areas like special educational needs in respect of children and a number of other children's issues. And I pay credit to the government for the fact that they have recognised some of those points. But there has been a slight flavour that welfare rights, welfare benefits generally, didn't quite rank in this league. Sort of flavour, I don't think anybody's actually said it. It's only a bit of money after all. Well, let me say this. No one who has been Secretary of State for Social Security would harbour the illusion that the 10 or 20 pounds a week that people could lose under the housing benefit cap, for example, because they have a spare room and don't move, is a trivial sum. It may not be a great amount to many of us, most of us, all of us in this house, but there are a lot of people in this country to whom 10 or 20 pounds a week makes a big difference between whether you can heat or whether you can eat. I don't want to exaggerate this or get emotional about it, but some people will find themselves really frightened and hit by some aspects of this, and they will need somewhere to turn. I could quote, I will quote, a couple of points from the letter that David Pannick, Lord Pannick, wrote on behalf of all four of us. And it was on behalf of all four. I had cleared it and agreed it. I just wasn't here to sign. 81% of all cases heard in the first-tier tribunals relating to benefits are for benefits relating to disability. In 2009-10, an appellant at the first-tier tribunal that received advice before going to the tribunal was 78% more likely to win their appeal than an unadvised appellant. And then there is another point here about, I'll come back to perhaps in a moment, that nobody actually believes that the savings the government have claimed for these proposals will actually be realised. Wherever you look, the CABs, the Law Society, the fund that was the report that was done by King's College, they all reckon that a lot of this saving is illusory and that the knock-on effects on other government departments will be substantial, but have so far been completely unquantified. My third main point is about the effect of all this on the places where people can and do turn for help in an indirect, both direct and indirect kind of way. The Citizens' Advice Bureaus, universally admired, supported and valued, both in this house and the other place, and a whole variety of law centres and other big society advisory services throughout the country. The CABs have just published a report which I hope everyone will read. I have it here. I'm not going to quote the whole of it. At least I had it here. Here it is. Just a bit from the introduction and the conclusion. In between, there are a lot of case studies. From the introduction, specialist advice has become a core part of the CAB service. Our frontline caseworkers and managers have told us that the impact of the proposed changes to legal aid on specialist services will be devastating. The overwhelming majority say that it will be impossible to provide a specialist service, while over half say it may be impossible to continue providing any advice service at all. I break the quote briefly and then go on, and it's not just the Citizens' Advice Service that will be affected. Law centres, independent advice agencies, and some solicitors' firms may find it difficult to continue to operate. And then from the conclusion, if I can get that open. Having quoted the various cases, they conclude if these cases, could be empowered to help themselves without specialist advice, casework and support from legal aid, then every CAB would rejoice. But that is not the reality. It will be a massive failure of the justice system if they are abandoned. My Lords, I'm going to conclude quite quickly, but I'll just make one other point. The government have in a way acknowledged that there may be a need for supporting other advice services, but we so have no real idea how that's to be done. We have a promise of a one-off 20 million, which is not a lot in this context. There's a review going on which hasn't been completed and of which we don't know the results. We have no serious commitment as to what the government will do when it has them. The nearest we've got is a statement commenting on the King's College study that I referred to that says, and I quote, "We are committed to the not-for-profit sector and have committed 20 million this year to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of advice services." But this does not mean that government will meet all demand in future. I would not want to back off this amendment on the basis of a vague promise that something might be done on that line in the future. I think this is a classic case where we're entitled to ask another place, to take another look, and that is what I hope we will do.